During the Easter season, our first readings come from the book of Acts, which is the story of the life of the early church, especially how the apostles went forth and spread the good news of Jesus Christ. And these accounts that we have from Acts continue to be quite relevant for us today, especially as we're beginning to hear more and more about the journey of faith, the pastoral planning process that we're going to be going through. You'll hear reference different topics like that of evangelization. Our times have become again very much like the times of the apostles. That we live among an increasing number of our neighbors who do not share our Christian values and faith. And if we wish our faith to continue to grow, as it did in the early church, then we must learn from these first followers of Jesus of how they lived and acted. So in today's first reading, it comes from the time of the first missionary journey of St. Paul. Now, Paul, along with Barnabas, have encountered Jesus in their own life. That has been a life-changing for them. They can't keep this good news to themselves. The love of Jesus compels them to go forth and to share how it's impacted their lives with everyone else. And so they even travel to all these various communities in Asia Minor to share the good news. And having reached the city of Antioch in Pisidia, which is in Turkey today, Paul and Barnabas, they go first to the synagogues and they speak to the Jewish people about the Lord, about all the things that God has done and how all the prophecies in the Old Testament of its coming Messiah has been fulfilled. And so while some of the Jewish faithful there are open to listening to them, there's others that respond quite negatively. Some of them were jealous, it says, that the attention that Paul and Barnabas were getting. Some lashed out verbally, as it says in that reading, with violent abuse. They contradicted what Paul said. It also says that prominent and influential women and men were incited to lead persecution against Paul and Barnabas. And it culminated in expelling the two of them from their region. And yet this didn't stop Paul and Barnabas from speaking. They would not be silenced. When one group of individuals rejected them, they simply redirected their conversations to others. And so here in Antioch, it says, is the first moment when they redirected their preaching towards even non-Jewish citizens, the Gentiles, many of whom they found ended up being even more open to hearing that God too desired them to receive salvation. And so we can apply these things that Paul and Barnabas experienced to our own times. There was a period, perhaps in the past, when we relied upon our faith to basically pass on generation to generation, basically culturally, to simply rely upon it naturally being carried on. And that kind of worked for a little while. But now we see that many Catholics have lost interest in practicing Catholicism. We see, for example, with Mass attendance declining 42% since 2003 in our archdiocese. That means in our parishes, our 8-parish grouping that we'll soon have, there's over 800 people that are registered as parishioners that on any given Sunday are just simply not choosing to join us. And more, there's people that consider themselves to be unaffiliated with any kind of faith. And that's, in a sense, the fastest growing religion that there is now, the unaffiliated. So we see that we don't need to travel to far-off places like Paul and Barnabas to find someone that we need to share the Lord with. And now it is true that we don't always know how someone might respond to us if we try to share our faith. They might reject us like they did Paul and Barnabas. They might even use violent verbal abuse when we try to share the good news of Jesus, or perhaps defend certain values like all human beings have an equal right to live, regardless of how old they are, young they are, whether they live in the crib or in the womb, that all human beings equally are valuable, and so we should protect them. Some people may not agree and might even incite some kind of persecution, as we see it happen in the early church. But that did not dissuade, it did not stop the apostles. As Peter and the apostles in last Sunday's reading said, even when they were faced of being arrested, they still said, we must obey God rather than men. And some people, we may be surprised. I know one atheist in particular expressed, he said that if you Christians really believe that you have a message of salvation that can save others from eternal death, and if you choose not to share that with us, then how much do you have to hate someone to not share that? If you really believe that you have such good news. Though notice for Paul and Barnabas, they weren't successful with everyone. And nor should we expect the same thing for every person that we might try to share the faith with. You know, when people even rejected Jesus in the Gospels, not everyone that he invited chose to follow him. And I think maybe for some of us, our greatest concern might be the family members that have stopped practicing the faith. But maybe you found that it feels like you just seem to not be able to do anything about it. Not much more than pray for them. And pray for them you should continue to do, especially that God would send maybe someone else, other individuals, other situations into their life that will draw them back to him. But you can also do something active as well to assist in that process. So let's say that you wish that you had a family member that would return to the practice of the faith. But talking with them has done nothing, and maybe even perhaps it might have even seemed to make things worse whenever you tried to say something. All right, continue to pray for them, but now move your efforts to share Jesus elsewhere. Invest in other relationships, 2 or 3 individuals that you know within the community, and begin just fostering that friendship, showing great concern for their life and slowly investing and getting to the point where you can invite them to consider following Jesus in a greater way. Even if each of us began to do something like that, slowly beginning to invite people to share in the faith, if each of us began doing that, then there would suddenly become more individuals within the larger communities that we have that are growing in relationship with the Lord. Even perhaps to a point where that person could get to a desire to want to share it with someone else. And maybe that third person wants to share it with another person. And perhaps God in his divine providence would then use those other individuals to be the individuals that you prayed for, would be the ones to try to bring your family member back. If you can't reach them directly, then maybe it can be done indirectly through God's grace. You know, you might end up, through that process, evangelizing one of your neighbor's family members. And one of your neighbors here in the pew or in one of our other churches may end up being the one to help evangelize your family member to draw them back to the faith. Evangelization is not an easy or a quick task. And it doesn't happen simply by saying a single word to somebody, by posting a quick thing on social media, or by putting stuff in the bulletin. It's not how it happens. It happens through the real difficult work of talking to one another, talking to someone face to face, learning from them what is important in their lives first, and then allowing time for them to grow in a trust of you. It takes calling upon the Holy Spirit to help us to notice the moments when our conversation might be leading to a moment of talking about the more important things in life, things like the faith. It takes prayer for the courage to be able to speak up in the right way at the right time. Though it's important to remember that it is God himself who converts hearts. It's not just up to us on our own. He doesn't send us out to do it by ourselves. Paul and Barnabas They were successful because of God's work within them. And I'm sure that the two of them at times were surprised at just how certain people that maybe they thought would never pay attention to them ended up opening their hearts to the message and began to follow Jesus. And I expect if we stepped out in faith in that same way, if we had that kind of courage to put ourselves out there, that we'll end up being surprised at how God will work through each of you. Because after all, Jesus is the Good Shepherd. He knows his own, his sheep, even his lost sheep. He can help to hear his voice.